Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. I'm your host, Tom Hood, the EVP for Business Engagement and Growth at AICPA SEMA, the largest association of professional accountants, CPAs, and CGMAs in the world. Today, we're going to be talking about top issues facing CFOs now from the CFO Leadership Council conference in Boston that I recently attended, put on by this guy, Jack McCullough. So he is, and I wish I had his walk-up song, by the way, is Enter the Sandman by Metallica. That's how we opened up this conference. He's the founder, I should have been playing it, Jack, actually. Founder of the CFO Leadership Council, a global organization dedicated to empowering the world's senior financial executives. He's a contributor to the Forbes CFO Network, author of 2 books, Secrets of Rockstar CFOs and the Psychopathic CEO, and Executive Survival Guide. Thought leader, speaker, contributor, and mentor to CFOs. Welcome, Jack McCullough.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. It's great to do this. I think this is my 3rd time here. And, for me, one of the highlights of the conference last month was that you and I actually met in person for the first time.
Exactly. It was awesome. And that was a fantastic conference, by the way.
Thanks. And by the way, there are a lot of CFOs who are headbangers. So the choice of Metallica was probably a pretty good one.
I loved it. So, all right. So at the end of May, you held that annual CFO week and the CFO Leadership Council live for the first time since the pandemic. And you did open with Metallica's Enter Sandman, which I thought just added the exclamation point to the conference, right? The energy kind of kicking it off live. It was amazing and palpable. What were your biggest takeaways from the conference?
I think, as I look back, I probably come up with 2. And the first one is, if you remember James Carville, he was an advisor to Clinton, and he famously said, it's the economy, stupid. And in this case, it's the people, stupid. It's all about the talent, how to lead it, how to motivate it, how to retain it. Every discussion, whatever the topic was, it turned to people. Even topics that seemed like they were, technical in nature or going public in the capital markets, whatever it might be. Fundamentally, it always turned its way back to the team and the people. And, it was great to see. And then I guess the other thing that caught me a little bit by surprise is that finally, I think the perception of CFOs by others is catching up to the reality. CFOs have been very operational, very strategic thinkers, for some time. It's certainly increased since the start of COVID. But it's shocking to me how many people who, candidly should know better still think of CFOs as sort of back office reporting history type of people. And it was good to see. It's clear that, it's not just board members, but CEOs and the entire C-suite and employees and everyone that's finally beginning to recognize the value that CFOs can bring to an organization besides financial reporting.
I think that's spot on. And I love that, right? Because that's exactly what we've been promoting for quite a while, just like you, that we're moving up into this kind of value area and chief value officers partnering in the business, all that good stuff. So I love that. You're right. I think that was true as a major takeaway. Now, I want to segue to your opener. You had Ram Charan, world-renowned consultant and speaker, talking about how CFOs can lead businesses through inflation, and even talked a little bit about the R word, right, recession. But he said we should be thinking cash is king and shifting our focus to the balance sheet from the income statement. And quite frankly, many of our CFOs haven't had that to deal with for quite a while, right? It's been probably well over 10 years since we really had this inflationary pressure and all that kind of stuff going on. So what do you think? What's this mean? And how would you say what CFOs can do to get ahead of this inflation thing we're seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting because we haven't really dealt with deep inflation throughout my career. And the average age of a CFO Leadership Council member, we determined it was 42, 20 years experience. So we projected it to be 42, which means they've never really dealt with inflation. I jokingly say when people ask me for my advice, I say, you should really ask my parents. They've been dealing with it their entire life, but it is fairly new to our generation. So I think, as odd as it might sound, Tom, one of the critical things that a CFO should be doing is learning and educating. Inflation, it's more than just the prices going up, right? It has, impact after impact after impact. So learn everything you can about inflation, how it's going to impact your business. And then you need to recognize that the rest of the team is really counting on you to impart wisdom and leadership in dealing with this. It's true. The C-suite probably doesn't know too much about it. The sales team in particular, they've got some issues to face. And even the CEO and the board probably don't know as much about inflation as you can learn. So it's an invaluable leadership responsibility you have. So.
I love that. And Ram made the point that I think he said it was like one of his second most important points is you're going to have to really communicate and over communicate with your team and with people like the sales group, et cetera, in your company, because to your point, they don't know about this. So if you get educated yourself, and obviously your conference gave them a good head start on that, you need to learn all about that, begin to start thinking about how we start focusing on cash flow and the balance sheet, receivables, inventory, right? Watch those cash traps, as Ram said. And then you're right, it's learning and application so you can begin to help forecast and educate people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the sales team, and you need to work with them about pricing strategy. And one of the things that we've learned, it wasn't mentioned explicitly at the conference, is it used to be you could raise prices once a year and, generally your customers would accept it. But what we've discovered is companies are raising prices 3-4 times a year, and customers kind of get it. There's not the pushback that maybe a year ago you would have thought. But work strategically with the sales team, educating them about, some of the realities they're going to be facing, and come up with a really thoughtful pricing strategy. Because if it's 8% inflation, does that mean, if you raise 8% now, well, you're still going to be behind the curve a year from now, maybe, right? If it doesn't stop in a year. So that's a critical thing. And the other thing that he mentioned, which, I wouldn't have thought of, but do some financial due diligence on your customers and, make sure they can pay, or, find a way to make it work for them, right? I mean, if they're good people, you have a long relationship and they're in a short-term cash flow crunch, I don't think you want to say, good luck, call us in 90 days when you get past this. You need to find a way to, keep your customers as loyal. But you do have to do the due diligence, and you do sort of have to remember you're responsible for your company. So, you might have to make some difficult decisions. And then I think the last takeaway might be to work cross-functionally. Yeah. And other than maybe the chief people officer, I would probably argue that the chief financial officer has the most cross-functional job.
Yep.
So, you're probably going to be working with your purchasing people, your inventory management people, and doing that sort of planning, and take those discussions all the way to the salespeople who are interacting with the customers. Because, bluntly, you don't want to have a huge sales opportunity and, if you're the type of company that sells inventory and, not be able to fulfill it, right? I mean, that's egg on a lot of people's faces, largely the CFOs, if he or she could have fixed that. So,
yeah, spot on. So, all right, you're full of these good sound bites, right? You said CFOs are no longer reporting history, but making history. Tell our audience what you mean by this.
Sure. And, at the start of my career as a CFO, back when we recorded on stone tablets and, the quill pens and that type of thing.
I was right there with you.
Yeah, there you go. So, but back then, often the CFO is simply the best accountant in his or her company. And, until relatively recently, you could probably be a very successful CFO simply with, outstanding accounting skills and minimal overall business skills. But that's really not the way things are today. The expectations and needs of CFOs are very, very dramatic. And it's been changing, but I think COVID turned the evolution into a revolution. I think the acceleration of it being strategic, it was sort of put on steroids. Am I mixing metaphors? Is that allowed?
That's okay. It's good.
But, CFOs, they've emerged. They are the key strategic partner to the CEO. Again, I'd argue that they're probably the most cross-functional executive. And one of my friends, she's one of the best CFOs I know. She's the CFO of Sage US. Her name's Judy Romano.
Yeah, I know Judy.
Oh, you know Judy. Okay. So she gives advice to up and coming CFOs or people on the verge of it. And she tells people, don't think of yourself as a financial executive. Think of yourself as a cross-functional executive who happens to be a financial expert. And that's the big thing. Like the best CFOs, they're visiting customers. They understand the overall business. They're not on boards. That's not appropriate in most cases, but they interact heavily with the boards. They truly understand the business completely. And it's been happening slowly, but now it's here. And the best companies that survive, largely it's because they have great CFOs.
Yeah, it's funny because we have a future finance leadership group, and they talk about that all the time. In fact, one of them, who's a friend of mine, she's the CFO of Ronstadt, and she said, the next is now. Like, this is our defining moment, and we need to take it. And you're right. Coming through the pandemic, we proved our mettle, if you will, helping our companies get through that, doing all the forecasting, et cetera. And now it's time to continue that trajectory. Don't go back to the way we were. Keep moving forward. So I think you just captured that very well. And then this segues to the next part, because as you were describing the cross-functional, it reminds me of what we talked about in the sessions we did up there at the conference, which were on training development essentials, investing in your team to keep your team. And we talk about the T-shaped professional, which is basically that boundary crossing skills on top of our deep accounting, technical, functional industry skills, right? So right spot on with what you're talking about. And we covered kind of these, we call them the top 5 skills, but strategic and critical thinking, storytelling and communication, that's 2, anticipating and serving evolving needs, that gets to this, to your point about educating about inflation, looking ahead at stuff, collaboration and integration, that's the ability to work cross-functionally. And then the new kid on the block this year, Jack, was agile mindset and work skills. That suddenly people are saying we have to speed up our ability to execute in finance. What do you think about that? What's your kind of thinking around that?
Yeah, I think those are spot on. And I do particularly like the last one. But, all of them are absolutely fascinating. And the one that, when I spoke to people that they were surprised about a little bit, and then they recognized it in themselves, but they hadn't thought of it, was storytelling. It's like, what do you mean? I'm a CFO. I can't be a storyteller. And I'm like, well, story doesn't mean it's false.
Right.
So you're telling true stories, not fiction. But then they're like, yeah, that I hadn't thought of it, but that is actually one of my better skills. And I think the last time you and I spoke on this program, I referenced a survey that said, it was a survey of corporate America. What's the most trusted executive in your company? And it was head and shoulders the CFO, even above the president. And, so again, storytelling might not be the word that they themselves would choose to describe what they do, but nevertheless, it's applicable. And the one, you didn't expressly say the words, but every great CFO I know has this, and you kind of described it without saying it. High emotional IQs.
Yeah.
They genuinely care about people, and they're always thinking about the impact of people, and not just their employees. They actually want to see their customers get successful, and their investors get rich, and society flourish, and all of those things. I haven't met very many successful CFOs, or candidly any executive that doesn't have a high emotional IQ.
Yeah, and in this environment, it's more important than ever, right? Certainly, this is where we've seen that really rise to the top. So, I think you're absolutely right on there. Now, this also ties in the notion that we did some research with Oracle called Agile Finance Unleashed, which ties back into the Agile piece. But they had a thing that said 90% of finance leaders say their finance team does not have the adequate skills to support the enterprise in this period of change and digital transformation. Do you encounter that much in how you think about the group that you're talking to?
It's interesting because Barry told me that shortly after the study came out, and it's an overwhelming number, right? It's one of those things. How can that possibly be true? But it is. That, like, all of the great CFOs I know, and then most of the good ones, this sort of thing is top of mind. And they when I ask them, I'm like, what do you think? Does this make sense? Yeah, unfortunately it does. And I'm working hard, and it's just difficult to overcome. And so, it's a reality that everybody's facing, probably more so now than ever. You were to do the same survey now. My guess is it stayed the same or got a little bit worse, although you're at the point it can't get that much worse, right? But to answer your question of like the effect of this, it does have a domino effect because the first people I think who realize that they're not getting the skills and the training are the employees themselves. Mm-hmm. And what's going to happen is once they make this recognition that, hey, this isn't getting any better, it's not going to get any better. And, with the hot economy right now, you're going to start to leave your superstar employees and they're going to leave. It's, so you're going to have, your good employees, but not superstar employees trying to cover for them. Good luck with that. And the other thing, Generation Z hasn't yet made its footprint felt.
Right.
Yet. I mean, but it is, if you study Generation Z, they're about to, we're going to be working for Gen Z people in a couple of years. There's very little doubt in my mind. And, the one thing that I really admire about Generation Z, and I'm a boomer, so I guess it's one of those things I can make bald jokes and boomer jokes, but Generation Z, I believe, is the most intellectually curious generation ever. They're less motivated by money than boomers were. In our defense, we didn't have money growing up. Most of us were, we're working class, middle class kids. But they're not motivated by money the way we were. What they're motivated by is an intellectual challenge. They want that more than anything. They'll take less money to be challenged intellectually. And you've got to provide the tools to make that happen, or, they're going to go somewhere else. And guess what? They're going to get 5 job offers within 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this, in this age of inflation, potential recession, challenges coming up in front of us, this idea of training and development is huge. They value that more than ever. They also value purpose. So we're finding a lot of finance teams are creating a purpose for their finance team inside and connected to the purpose of the organization, which also then connects to ESG and some of those other things that I think are exciting for a finance profession to be able to start thinking about and getting involved in, because that's all going to mean higher retention, right? And better talent.
Absolutely. And, it's interesting because we do roundtables with our members and, so we let them pick the topics rather than me doing my best job to guess. And purpose-driven stuff, like you mentioned, is very high on the list. And, some of the old school stuff like, compliance, it's not that it's not important, but it just doesn't rank all that high to them. So,
yeah. So we closed our 2 sessions with an interactive brainstorm where the whole group, we basically crowdsourced, like, what are you going to do as a result of what you heard in the conference and what we talked about in our session? So here they were in order. It's pretty cool. So training courses and more mentoring, that was number 1. So back to what we've just been talking about. They seem to be getting it and saying, what do we got to do? The next one was create a vision and purpose for your team, which gets back to giving them a picture of what you're going to do. And this new finance, right? Value added finance, proactive, not, as you said, reporting numbers, but reporting history, but making history. The other one was reset the team with a mindset and a vision. That's kind of connected to the other one. Talent evaluation for people skills. So your EQ showed up that we've got to have accountants with a higher EQ to really help people through all of this. And then the last one was get my accounting and finance leaders together to make sure their development plans are taking into account all these changes that are going on.
Yeah, that's a great list. You're paying me a fortune to do this with you, and I wish I could add to it, but really, that's pretty complete. I feel like I'm taking money for nothing on that one.
I hear you. It's the wisdom of the crowd, right? Yeah. I mean, it was a great group there. I love being with you guys live. Last year, obviously, we were all virtual, but it was awesome, and you run a good show up there. So keep up the great work. We'll be back, obviously, on that. Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
No, but I do want to, take the time to thank you for the opportunity today, as well as just the relationship that we've developed with the 2 organizations over the last couple of years. We have different audiences, but very similar things. You're doing great work in your space. We're doing great work in our space, I'd like to think. And so thank you for being part of that.
Awesome. All right. Well, Jack, thank you very much. And who knows, we might have you back yet another time. You're going to become a regular on this show, I think. So for more with Jack McCullough, get a copy of his book, The Psychopathic CEO and Executive Survival Guide, on Amazon. Talk to him on Twitter. He's at Jack McCullough, McCullough. I'll put it in the show notes in the comments. And thank you for all of you out there for joining us. And don't miss our other Future Ready Live sessions back here on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern. See you then. Thank you.